In 2000, Kirsten Butler went missing from TCU, and I think I've uncovered what really happened to her. All Luke left in our old apartment for me was a single banker's box of what he considered to be my possessions. One of those white cardboard boxes with the handles built into the side. The box truly signified that I'd been fired from my 7-year relationship. The move was cruel and calculated, but it was factual. A Texas vagabond who never left owned enough possessions to where she couldn't pack up and move to another town at the drop of a hat. The few things which were truly mine sat cased in that box. I tipped the contents of the box out onto the floor to take stock of my arsenal. A hairbrush, a stick of secret, with only 25% remaining, a frayed toothbrush, a half-filled pint of cheap vodka, and a few changes of clothes, unwashed, fell out onto the stiff carpet. Stuck in the bottom of the box were my only non-essential possessions that Luke returned to me, my high school yearbooks. I laughed out loud when I saw the yearbooks lying there next to a pair of stained socks. The yearbooks were the only possessions of mine recovered from my mom's house after she died, mailed to me by my Aunt Helen, along with a note which scolded me for my lack of sobriety at my mom's funeral. Nothing else to do on a winter's Sunday afternoon, and a pinch of sad nostalgia coursing through my veins, I sat down on the floor and started combing through the yearbooks. I never could have imagined my early adult life would get so sad that I would yearn for the days of acne, broken braces, 7:50 a.m. bells, and my fickle group of friends from East Lubbock High School. But that's where I was. Sad, sad, sad. The yearbook at the bottom of the pile was not mine, bound with leather, full color, and featuring a golden emboss of a stately-looking manor on the front. I figured it had to be from Luke's private school in Dallas-Worthington Academy. A few turns of thick pages confirmed my thoughts and sent me flipping through endless headshots of well-put-together teens bound for success, or at least inherited money, and inane messages written in permanent marker. I stopped on the class of 2000, which produced Luke Hanratty, a thin bastard from third-generation money, with jet black hair that always perfectly fell to the side, dark eyes, and years of suppressed rage. He hid behind passive indifference. I found his portrait and stared into the face that I loved for almost 7 years, and felt those same emotions I had before he sent me a text saying it was over. I still loved the guy, even if I hated him. I found the messages scribbled next to the portraits more interesting than Luke's senior portrait. It was like an ancient Facebook portraits of people's best looks next to their names and their activities. But the best part was the photos which had comments written on them in black ink. Luke had a lot of thoughts about his classmates, and none of them were nice. Fag, fat, horseface, bitch, asshole. I couldn't believe I had attached myself for so long to a man so vile. Luke was known for having a caustic sense of humor, but this was over the top. He almost never went home to visit his parents in Dallas. Maybe it was because he hated everyone he grew up with, or vice versa. I skimmed through most of the insults, but one particularly caught my eye. A black-haired girl with a pale face and dark makeup named Kirsten Butler drew extra hate from Luke's pen. Slut was written above her head, but that was just the start of it. Her entire profile was covered with a dark X. Her name was crossed out. I could only actually read it because the ink had faded, and her eyes were dotted with red marker. I at first assumed Kirsten was just one of Luke's high school exes that we never really talked about, but I also recognized that name and that picture of the dark-haired girl half smiling with the dimpled cheeks. I hit up Google on my phone for Kirsten Butler from Worthington Academy. The results sucked the breath out of me and confirmed that I was vaguely familiar with Kirsten. Kirsten Butler went missing from her dorm at Texas Christian University just a few weeks into her first fall semester in October of 2000 and was never seen or heard from again. No body, no rumors of popping up in another country with a different name, no clothes found on a desolate country road out in West Texas. Nothing. Kirsten's case was before the days of social media where she would have become a national celebrity, but she was a brief regional celebrity around Texas, and I was vaguely familiar with her case from back when it happened. I had no idea that she went to school with Luke though, let alone was in his class and a most hated figure of his. Google produced a little on Kirsten's case. I found some old Dallas newspaper articles, a missing persons report, even a few posts on Reddit in a section for unsolved mysteries, but not much information. The yearbook ended up unearthing more clues than the internet. I noticed a message from Kirsten scrawled in the back pages of the book in the signatures section. Luke, creative writing rocked with you in it. Let me know if you want to swing over to Fort Worth sometime next year, if you get bored sticking around in the Big D at SMU. 214-555-3116. Kirsten. I called the number. No one answered. I thought nothing of it. I received a call from a 214 area code I didn't recognize when I was walking out of a depressing job interview. Hello? Who is this? An elderly woman's voice crackled through the phone, sounding confused and accusatory at the same time. Who is this? You called me. You called Kirsten's pager. It took me a few seconds to register what a pager was, but I eventually journeyed back to the call I made to Kirsten's number in Luke's yearbook. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I found that number in a yearbook and called it. I really didn't know what to say. I never thought my random sleuthing would produce anything, and I didn't really have anything that I wanted to accomplish. Well, I'm Kirsten's mother, Susan. No one has called that pager in 17 years. You understand how I could be a little tuned up. Whose yearbook was that in? My first thought was to protect Luke. Then I thought about the breakup, the other woman, the horrible things he said to me in fights. Luke Hanratty. The other end of the line was silent for a good 5 seconds. Susan's confrontational abrasion melted away into the sweetness of a southern grandma, sweet as molasses. Now, sweet thing, do you think you could bring that yearbook to me up in North Dallas? Can I just mail it to you or drop it off? I can fix you dinner and explain you why it has to be this way if you can do that. There are some things you probably need to know I can only explain in person. Susan lived in a little house in a part of Dallas that will probably be cool in 5 years, but is just shitty now. I had to avoid 10 landmines of dog feces as I walked up to the faded and rotted pink front door. I knocked on the door softly as to not disturb a hornet's nest which bustled above the doorframe. The yips and clawings of what sounded like a dozen lapdogs erupted as soon as I knocked. Heavens! I heard Susan growl from the other side of the door. The door opened, and 5 different dogs, all only a little larger than your average squirrel, darted at my feet. I tried to act like it didn't bother me. Probably failed. Susan looked better than I thought she would. Thin but healthy, with a head of long blonde hair, dyed but dyed well, and a classy outfit of black leggings, a black and grey cardigan over a plain white shirt, and hipster glasses. She was far from the obese, elderly pile of ash I expected to find. I handed Susan the yearbook, but she made no move for it. No. I made short ribs and peach pie for two, not one. Susan gave me a warm smile, the kind I yearned for from a parental figure my entire life. I relented and followed her into her home and held my breath, fighting against the burn of pet urine mixing with the scent of baking food. Susan cooked the kind of food I always wished a parental figure would cook for me. Gourmet, but down home, hearty and filling. I felt overindulged about 3 bites in, but couldn't stop eating. I've been waiting for someone to dial that pager for 17 years. Susan turned the conversation to the real reason I was there after about 10 minutes of small talk while I was in mid-bite. I had forgotten why I was even there for a second. We got that pager for Kirsten as a compromise. She wanted a cell phone, but we didn't want to give her everything we wanted, so we met in the middle with that thing. I liked that it helped us keep tabs on her when she headed over to Texas Christian, but Dave wasn't sure. Susan nodded her head sideways at a headshot of smiling middle-aged man in a Sears photo shoot, who I assumed was Dave. His mug was pinned up on the wall next to a toaster. Dave passed just a couple years after Kirsten went missing. Pancreatic cancer. Awful. I think he was poisoned by the awfulness of what happened to our only daughter. We spent all the money we had on his no-good pancreas and the pursuit of any clue we could with Kirsten. Had to eventually downgrade to this jalopy, move out of the community we raised Kirsten in. But the good news is, we got our first godforsaken clue, for free, 15 years after I'd given up, right? I didn't know how to react. It's okay. I'm as happy about it as I can be, Susan went on, and I'll give you a break. I had you come here because things aren't as simple as you might think they would be. Okay. I couldn't help but be pensive, and not just because one of Susan's dogs was licking my ankle. We believe someone was actively working against us in the Dallas Police Department. Anything we ever turned in as evidence always seemed to go missing. Any question we had, we never got an answer to. They blamed everything on Dave putting the investigation into his own hands early on, saying he crossed a lot of boundaries that negated evidence, but it was bull. Dave only made a few calls, checked out Kirsten's dorm room, talked to her roommate, because the police weren't. Kirsten's roommate called us up one day asking if the cops were ever going to talk to her because it had been weeks and they hadn't even contacted her. Wow. But supposedly, Dave inviting Kirsten's roommate over here for salad one night was enough to poison the whole investigation. So, that's why I don't want you to just turn over that yearbook to someone. I also want you to know that this is hard to say, but you might want to be careful with how you handle this as well. We had some early potential leads from a couple of kids at Texas Christian who may have saw something, knew something, but they quickly fell off into the ether, and we never found out why. So, I don't know what in the world it is, but just know that dialing that number may have changed your life. Okay, well, thank you, I guess. I'm sorry. It is what it is. I want to ask you if you are comfortable answering some questions, though. I guess I might as well. You said the yearbook you found belonged to Luke Hanratty? Yeah. And what is your relation to him, if you don't mind me asking? Ex-boyfriend. Oh, sorry if I opened a wound. It's okay. It was already still open. It's only been a few weeks. Well, I hate to say it, but he might be Jake Doe. You see, we know there was a boy in Kirsten's life around that time, but we have never had a slight inkling as to who he might be. They did everything in heavy secrecy, because she was technically still with her high school boyfriend Brady, even though he went to A&M. They were trying to do the long-distance thing, but her friends at TCU said they think she was hanging around with another boy. He would block his number before he paged her. She would call him from the phones in common areas around the campus. Maybe it was your Luke. At this point, I didn't know what else I could do for Susan. I wanted to help her, but I didn't want to spend any more of my life doing anything that had anything to do with Luke Hanratty. I was ready to move on. I can give you the yearbook, I said. I looked up Luke online before you came to, and it looks like his parents own Hanratty and Hanratty, the big law firm downtown. They've worked defending the police in big cases. They might be blocking evidence through their connections, knowing their son might have something to do with it. That made sense, based on the soulless, yuppie workaholic, only care about what people think image I got from Luke's parents every time I met them. Luke told me once they would murder a baby if they thought it might help them get a big new case. Can I see it? Susan finally asked, for the whole entire reason I was even there. I blushed when she quickly flipped to Kirsten's picture and read the horrible things scrawled in there. I played with the last of the food on my plate. Well, this is certainly interesting, Susan whispered across the table. I looked across the table and started to see tears form in Susan's eyes behind her thick glasses. It's just... Susan had to stop and let out a few sobs. It's just... I know Kirsten wasn't a bad girl. She didn't do these kinds of things. She was a good girl. She didn't deserve this. As bad as I felt for Susan, the situation was just too much and too awkward for me. I wanted to get out. I figured I had helped her as much as I possibly could, and I had my own problems. I was beginning to think my boyfriend of more than 5 years may have killed someone. No matter how good that peach pie in the oven smelled, and it smelled really, really good, I wasn't going to stick around for it. I thanked Susan for her time, told her she could keep the yearbook, and excused myself before dessert. I took the 20-minute drive to my home on my friend's couch with the plan to not do a single thing more and hope everything just blew over and took care of itself. It was basically a smaller version of my overall life plan. A few days passed with nothing. I held some brief relief that the whole thing would be over. Then the calls from Luke started. I ignored the first few. Let him leave vague voicemails about how I needed to call him back about something serious. This was his usual MO for when we were about to break up. He would start a horrible fight or do something really bad and then try to pull the romantic comedy move of doing something over the top romantic, or would buy me some piece of jewelry and the wound scabbed over enough to drag our doomed relationship onward. Not this time. The calls from Luke kept coming and coming and coming, and I kept ignoring and ignoring and ignoring, but I knew he was going to do something drastic. I just didn't know what. An oozing sense of dread seeped into me and stuck me on my friend's couch for days, where I was crashing, unable to move anywhere but between the couch, bathroom, and refrigerator. Luke made that drastic move in the middle of the night during one of my trips to the bathroom. I heard his voice whispering from outside the open window as I washed my hands in the near dark. "Hey, Kayla," I screamed as loud as I ever have in my entire life, I looked out the half-opened window and saw the shadow of Luke standing in the bushes outside my friend's ground-floor apartment. He looked at me through the cover of a dark hoodie, with his shaggy hair jutting out the front. "Sorry, I knocked on the door, but no one answered and you won't answer your phone," Luke whispered. "So you fucking go Norman Bates and look at me through the bathroom window. Get out of here," I screamed back. "No, you don't understand. You did something you shouldn't have done. Now these people are after me." "No, you did something you shouldn't have done." I slammed the window shut. "If I see you again, I'm calling the cops," I yelled at the closed window. The texts started to come in from Luke as soon as I got back to the couch. I deleted them without reading them and eventually blocked Luke's number after about the 10th call and text. I covered myself in a blanket on the couch and planned on staying right there until the day I died. I started to ease back into life as the days passed without communication attempts from Luke. I got back up off the couch and started my job hunt again, went on walks to the park, went shopping for food with the little money I had a couple of times, and even went for a couple aimless drives around town to clear my head after my friend said she had to move out in 2 weeks because she was going to move in with her boyfriend. One of those blank-minded drives took me out to the edge of the city, to the parts of town where the urban sprawl started to melt into the hints of rural America. Little patches of woods and lonely gas stations dotted the roads. Officially lost, I pulled over so I could load up directions to get back home on my phone. I slowed down next to a little patch of woods between run-down houses on a dark road. A knock came at my window before I could get my phone out. I screamed even louder than I did when Luke confronted me in the bathroom. I looked up at the aged face of a woman that I knew, but couldn't quite put my finger on why I knew her. "Can I talk to you really quick?" the woman asked, her voice also vaguely familiar. I stared at the woman for a few seconds and it started to register. It was Luke's mom, Nancy. She had aged a lot since the last time I had seen her. I rolled the window down about 2 inches. "What do you want?" I asked. Another long look revealed exhausted eyes in Nancy's skull and a coat of sweat. "Have you seen Luke?" Nancy asked. "No, I've been avoiding him, and I think you're pretty disgusting. Personally," I spat back. "What are you talking about?" "I found out about Kirsten, the missing girl from TCU. It seems pretty clear Luke was involved, and you helped cover it up." "What?" Nancy shot back, sounding offended. "You have no idea," she then muttered under her breath. Nancy returned the long, hard look I was giving her. "You probably don't realize this, but you're in serious danger. I need to know what you did and who you talked to." "What are you talking about?" "Just listen," Nancy cut me off. "I'm guessing you talked to Susan for some reason." "Yeah, that was a bad idea," Nancy cut me off. "You have no idea what you did." A pair of headlights drove up behind us and stopped to the right of Nancy's car, which was parked behind mine. Nancy looked over to the headlights. The last drops of life flushed out of her face. A bang sound rang out in the night, and Nancy's SUV started to sink to the right. "Shit," Nancy seethed underneath her breath. Nancy turned to me with her eyes wide. "Let me in the car," Nancy said. "Why would I let you in my car?" I asked. I was interrupted by the sound of a car door closing behind us, over by Nancy's SUV. Nancy started wrenching on the door handle. The door wouldn't open. I already locked it. "Please," Nancy pleaded with a depth of desperation I had never heard come out of a human being. I heard heavy footsteps come up towards the back of my car from behind. "Please," Nancy whined out. I flicked the unlock button. "Go to the back door," I said. Nancy jumped over to the back seat door behind me and slipped in the car. I hit the door's lock as soon as she opened the door. "Go, go, go," Nancy yelled as soon as she was in the back seat. I floored it. My Ford Focus jetted off. The force snapped my neck back. I didn't let up off the gas until we were well away from the scene. "What was that?" I screamed. "What did you do?" I found Luke's old yearbook, saw that he had written slut and all this horrible stuff on Kirsten's yearbook picture, and then found her phone number written in the back of the thing. I called the number. An old lady called me back and said I needed to bring the yearbook to her. I did. "I can't believe you made it out of that place alive," Nancy said with a laugh. A pair of headlights entered my rear view mirror. "I think they're following us," I said frantic. "Is that her?" Nancy looked back, then back at me. "Just keep driving." "Why is she—" I hadn't been paying attention to the road, distracted by Nancy and the headlights. I stopped talking because the curve of a road was just feet in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. We careened into a ditch and smashed into the hard ground. The world went into slow motion for a few moments. I saw my cell phone fly by my face. I heard the sound of glass breaking. I felt something hard smack against the back of my head. Then the lights went out. The coppery taste of blood stung my tongue when I woke up. I gagged and coughed before I opened my eyes and threw my body forward to hit the ground, but couldn't. I was suspended by something which tethered me from behind. I opened my eyes and saw nothing but a blank white wall in front of me. I had never been so terrified in my life to see just a blank image. I screamed out without even knowing exactly what I was screaming about yet. My body had a thick, dull ache. My core tingled with sharp pain when I screamed. "Help!" I screamed. "Please, please, please, please." I punctuated my bella with pathetic pleads. "At least you're up," a voice whispered from behind me. I jumped from the sound of a voice, but calmed. Once it registered in my brain as belonging to Luke. I tried to wiggle in my seat and turn around, but couldn't. The lashes of rope tied tight around my wrists and feet wouldn't let me. I was stuck, staring at the blank wall. "Don't fight. Save your energy. There is no use trying that yet. And you're probably really hurt," Luke said. I stopped and took in a few huge breaths. "What is this?" I asked with sobs building in my jaw. She locked us somewhere in her house, I think. She had me blindfolded when I got brought in here. Someone must be helping her, because someone carried me in here, and I'm pretty sure she doesn't have that kind of strength," Luke explained. "What is the deal?" "This woman has always thought I was responsible for the disappearance of her daughter, and she is right, but not for the right reasons. I helped her daughter disappear her freshman year at TCU, but only so she could get away from her and her sadistic husband. We were semi-dating, and she told me all about the awful abuse she suffered, and she worried because it was getting worse as she got older, more physically mature. The truth was, the cops knew they could never prove anything against her parents, and they believed me and my parents when we told them about why and how she ran away, so they didn't care. "What does she want with me?" I screamed back. My parents were able to keep it, so she never knew who I was. But now, thanks to my wonderful ex-girlfriend, I'm tied up in this psycho's basement, while she probably prepares a Hansel and Gretel marinade for us. Congratulations, You probably don't realize this, but you're in serious danger. I need to know what you did and who you talked to. What are you talking about? Just listen, Nancy cut me off. I'm guessing you talked to Susan for some reason. Yeah, that was a bad idea, Nancy cut me off. You have no idea what you did. A pair of headlights drove up behind us and stopped to the right of Nancy's car, which was parked behind mine. Nancy looked over to the headlights. The last drops of life flushed out of her face. A bang sound rang out in the night, and Nancy's SUV started to sink to the right. Shit, Nancy seethed underneath her breath. Nancy turned to me with her eyes wide. Let me in the car, Nancy said. Why would I let you in my car? I asked. I was interrupted by the sound of a car door closing behind us, over by Nancy's SUV. Nancy started wrenching on the door handle. The door wouldn't open. I already locked it. Please, Nancy pleaded with a depth of desperation I had never heard come out of a human being. I heard heavy footsteps come up towards the back of my car from behind. Please, Nancy whined out. I flicked the unlock button. Go to the back door, I said. Nancy jumped over to the backseat door behind me and slipped in the car. I hit the door's lock as soon as she opened the door. Go, 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 Nancy yelled as soon as she was in the back seat. I floored it. My Ford Focus jetted off. The force snapped my neck back. I didn't let up off the gas until we were well away from the scene. What was that? I screamed. What did you do? I found Luke's old yearbook, saw that he had written slut and all this horrible stuff on Kirsten's yearbook picture, and then found her phone number written in the back of the thing. I called the number. An old lady called me back and said I needed to bring the yearbook to her. I did. I can't believe you made it out of that place alive, Nancy said with a laugh. A pair of headlights entered my rearview mirror. I think they're following us, I said frantic. Is that her? Nancy looked back, then back at me. Just keep driving. Why is she? I hadn't been paying attention to the road, distracted by Nancy and the headlights. I stopped talking because the curve of a road was just feet in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. We careened into a ditch and smashed into the hard ground. The world went into slow motion for a few moments. I saw my cell phone fly by my face. I heard the sound of glass breaking. I felt something hard smack against the back of my head. Then the lights went out. The coppery taste of blood stung my tongue when I woke up. I gagged and coughed before I opened my eyes and threw my body forward to hit the ground, but couldn't. I was suspended by something which tethered me from behind. I opened my eyes and saw nothing but a blank white wall in front of me. I had never been so terrified in my life to see just a blank image. I screamed out without even knowing exactly what I was screaming about yet. My body had a thick, dull ache. My core tingled with sharp pain when I screamed. Help! I screamed. Please, 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 please. I punctuated my blah with pathetic pleads. At least you're up, a voice whispered from behind me. I jumped from the sound of a voice, but calmed. Once it registered in my brain as belonging to Luke. I tried to wiggle in my seat and turn around, but couldn't. The lashes of rope tied tight around my wrists and feet wouldn't let me. I was stuck staring at the blank wall. Don't fight. Save your energy. There is no use trying that yet, and you're probably really hurt, Luke said. I stopped and took in a few huge breaths. What is this? I asked with sobs building in my jaw. She locked us somewhere in her house, I think. She had me blindfolded when I got brought in here. Someone must be helping her. because someone carried me in here, and I'm pretty sure she doesn't have that kind of strength," Luke explained. "What is the deal?" "This woman has always thought I was responsible for the disappearance of her daughter, and she is right, but not for the right reasons. I helped her daughter disappear her freshman year at TCU, but only so she could get away from her and her sadistic husband. We were semi-dating, and she told me all about the awful abuse she suffered, and she worried because it was getting worse as she got older, more physically mature. The truth was, the cops knew they could never prove anything against her parents, and they believed me and my parents when we told them about why and how she ran away, so they didn't care." "What does she want with me?" I screamed back. "My parents were able to keep it, so she never knew who I was. But now, thanks to my wonderful ex-girlfriend, I'm tied up in this psycho's basement, while she probably prepares a Hansel and Gretel marinade for us. Congratulations." Guilt burned in my stomach. Or maybe it was just the overall pain from the wreck. "But why did you write slut and all those horrible things on Kirsten's photo?" "Oh, Jesus Christ. That was Daniel. Daniel tried to date her in high school, but she wasn't having it, and he vandalized the shit out of my yearbook one drunken night. He wrote horrible things on like a quarter of the school's photos. You know him. He's a 10 times even bigger caustic dick than me." I believed Luke. I had met his friend Daniel around 10 times, and he had greeted me with a passive-aggressive semi-insult about my hair or outfit pretty much every time. He was one of those guys that thought every day was one of those Comedy Central roasts. "Well, what do we do now?" My question was answered by a creaky door opening from behind us and what sounded like above us. "Too late," I heard Luke mutter under his breath. The lights went out. The room went into complete darkness. I shivered. The sound of footsteps descending wooden stairs squeaked out from behind. "Please." The word quietly leaked out of my lips. My soft pleading was answered by the sounds of gut-wrenching screams from Luke, which started just a handful of feet behind me. The steps went back up the stairs, and I heard a door close again. I let out a deep breath. I listened to Luke's screams fade away. I held my eyes closed tight, even though the room was still pitch black. I think I hoped that if I closed them long and hard enough, that it would all go away. Wishful thinking. I opened my eyes and still stared at the darkness. I started to cry. I wiped the moisture which trickled out of my nose from the top of my lip and tried to suck it back up into my nasal cavity with a hard snort. "Don't cry," a voice whispered from behind. I jumped up in my chair. Probably got the whole thing a couple of feet off the ground. I was so startled. The chair hit the solid ground hard on the way down, and I felt both of the back legs fracture to where my seat was now wobbly. I leaned back against them to test them. They hadn't snapped yet, but I felt I could make that happen if I worked at them hard enough now. "You remind me of her," Susan whispered from behind me. The lights came on. I squinted tight against the burn for a few seconds. I slowly opened my eyes and saw that a large mirror had been stuck up against the blank wall in front of me. I looked back at myself, with a dark wig stuck on my sandy blonde hair, a pale shade makeup and purple lip liner caked on my face, a late 90s outfit of loose jeans and a jean jacket wrapped around my shoulders. I was pretty sure I recognized the jacket from Kirsten's yearbook picture. The white makeup looked familiar. I looked like a Kirsten impersonator. Susan stepped into the field of vision provided by the mirror. She walked up behind me and put her hands softly on my shoulders, looking like a hairstylist who's about to ask, "How does it look after a haircut?" I couldn't help but think it once you walked into my house. "I can see why Luke had such an attraction to both of you," Susan said, locking eyes with me in the mirror. I looked off Susan's eyes and leaned back in the chair, felt those back wooden legs flex just a little bit. It would only take one hard lean to snap them and make an attempt at a bolt. "He may have taken her from me, but he can't take you," Susan whispered into my ear. I put all of my weight against the back legs of the chair. The wooden pegs gave out and threw me hard against the floor. I grabbed hold of Susan's coarse hair on my way down and dragged her down with me. I ripped my tied hands off of the back of the chair and pulled Susan's frail neck into my chest with a strength I had never felt come out of me. I squeezed Susan's neck as hard as I could until I could feel the bones in her neck flex, just like the pegs of the chair had below me. "You're going to let me go right now," I whispered into Susan's ear. "You deserved whatever happened to you. Luke told me what you were doing to Kirsten. You're not a victim." "That's not true," Susan gasped out. "Cut these ropes off of me," I screamed into Susan's ear. "You gotta let me move my arms," Susan yelped out from the vice grip of my squeeze. I let Susan's arms get clear just enough to move, but to where she could only make a small range of motions. I felt her pull something hard from her pocket. I looked down and saw a thick pair of scissors. "Cut me loose," I screamed into her ear. "You think I'm bad. You don't even know about him," Susan muttered under her breath. "What?" I fired back. Susan didn't answer. She just silently sniped the rope that tied my wrists together. I recoiled from Susan and stood in front of her. I snatched the scissors away from her and went to work on the rope around my ankles. "What are you talking about?" I asked as I ripped away the rope around my ankles. "You'll find out," Susan muttered. I pushed Susan away from me. I didn't have time for whatever she was trying to do. I saw a flight of wooden stairs at the other end of the room. I ran at them as fast as I could, leaving Susan crumpled on the cement floor behind me. I pushed the door at the top of the stairs open and burst into what looked like a barn. The thick smell of hay and musty animal feces overwhelmed me once I stepped out of the basement I had been held in. I didn't have time to analyze where I was anymore. I just ran straight forward until I found another door and opened it up. The hot sting of a summer day said hi when I opened the door. I looked around and saw a rural backyard lined with dense forests of trees, which formed a U around a pale yellow farmhouse. It was a beautiful, quaint setting for the most horrifying event of my life. Little did I know at the moment that dash through the backyard would only be the beginning of the horrors I was going to experience. I was only a few strides into my run across the grass when I heard a frantic clicking sound ring into my ear and felt myself get flung high up into the air. I hung in the air for a few seconds, feeling weightless. I looked down and saw a crude crater in the ground where I just was, an ugly scar on the otherwise beautiful grass. I tried to form an idea around what had happened, but couldn't before I fell hard back to the earth. I felt footsteps approach me from the direction of the house as my ears rang. I looked up at the sky until my view was overtaken by the face of an elderly man who I vaguely recognized for a few seconds before I went out. It was Susan's husband, Kirsten's dad, Dave, his face horribly weathered since that photo which rested in Susan's living room that I saw when I made that fateful visit. He smiled at me before everything went dark. My entire body seared with hot pain when I woke up. I felt like a piece of meat in a frying pan. The pain was so intense I could barely breathe. I knew the feeling of a hospital bed from when I had my appendix taken out as a kid. I was all too familiar with that thudding pain which develops in your lower back when you lay down in a stiff bed for too long. Ugh, I groaned. I looked around the lonely hospital room, thinking about how much whatever happened was going to cost me. Well, cost may be the least of my concerns. Nancy walked into the room before I could even buzz a nurse for some pain medication. She sat down in a chair at the foot of my bed and looked at me with a stone face. Nancy filled in the missing pieces from the incident. She had been left at the scene of our wreck, but I had been taken away by Susan. I was taken to a farmhouse Susan and her husband owned outside of the city, where I was held with Luke. The story Susan told me about her husband being dead was fabricated. He was alive and well, and was a doomsday prepper out in the sticks, with a yard filled with homemade landmines, one of which I was unlucky enough to step on. Stepping on the mine was actually a stroke of luck, though. The neighbors were always on red alert for one of Dave's landmines going off, so they called the cops the second they heard one explode and ran over seconds after to find me knocked out in the yard, scaring Dave back into the house. It actually probably saved my life. Luke wasn't so lucky. He was still missing. Luke's mom was pushing to get Susan and her husband arrested for taking Luke, or killing Luke, she wasn't really sure, and kidnapping me for a period of time. She needed me to talk to the police to tell them what happened. I agreed, but I just needed to heal up in the hospital for a few days. Luke's mom was pleased. She said officers would be by soon to take my story right before she left. It has been a day now, and officers have not yet been by. However, something came by this morning that has given me alarm. It is probably just a coincidence, but a heaping piece of seemingly homemade peach pie was on the food stand next to my bed this morning. It smelled delicious, but I didn't care. I threw the thing in the trash next to my bed and pushed the button for the nurse so I could ask her to remove the basket as soon as possible.